We are now live, and we are going to start the show here. Again, if you're new to this, please remember we welcome your questions. We sometimes post them on the channel here and answer them directly. And if you're just joining us, feel free to type in something. Tell us where you're from, where you're tuning in from. It's a great privilege to have Esther Derby on the show here. We've known each other since the late 1990s.
Yeah.
And met in a experiential design workshop by Jerry Weinberg. So very long time ago. I think we have a shared passion for, helping the software community get better. And this is going to be a chance to dive deeper into what Esther does, but also just this concept of being balanced and graceful, which is a mantra in Joy of Agility. So I thought of Esther because she, well, of course, knows quite a bit of things. She's written some incredible books and is a great leader in our industry. And then she'd written something recently that used the word balance quite a bit. And I'm like, oh my God, this is like the sign that Esther is the perfect person to talk about this mantra. So welcome, Esther.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah. And I think you said we shared a passion for making the software industry better. And I think we also want to make it more humane and better for people who work in it.
Yes.
So it's not just about outcomes. We want, at least I think it's super important to make it more humane.
That's a really good point. I have daughters, and one of them's just entering the industry. And, boy, do I would love for it to be a more humane place to work.
Yeah, sure.
So I think it's related to our topic today.
I think it is.
So looks like Brett, Amber, Nicholas, good to see you all here.
Yeah.
If you're tuning in from other places, feel free to mention it. All right, well, why don't we get started? So the topics: be balanced and graceful. That's a mantra in Joy of Agility. It's a high bar, right? I would think, balance is tough. It's like, first of all, we say the word balance. What do we mean by this word? What does it mean to you, Esther?
Well, of course, there's the physical aspect of balance, which means you need to have your weight be centered, and you need to be able to move in a way that doesn't, send you off balance. And I think in some ways that's a useful metaphor for the way I usually think about balance in terms of work and relationships and just being in the world, which is the concept of congruence that comes from Virginia Satir's work. And that says that in any interaction, you need to hold roughly in balance your own needs and wants and those of the other people you're in connection with or in conversation with, working with, and then the context that you share. So you have to kind of balance all three of those things. And when you are in balance, that's when you can really access your empathy and creativity and your best thinking.
Excellent. Yeah. You're saying it's almost like a three-legged stool. It's your needs, the people you're working with, their needs, and then the context itself. Can you say more about that?
Well, so if we're at work, we have to consider not just what both of us we want, yourself and the other people, but you have to consider that we're here to accomplish something, to meet customer needs. So you have to consider that. If you're, in a different sort of interaction, say you're in a grocery store checkout line, right? You have your own wants and needs. You want to get through there quickly. There's the person checking out your groceries who, has their own wants and needs. So we want to be respectful of them, right? And kind to them. But you're also in a grocery store, there's a sort of transactional nature to the relationship. So you consider that context, and you don't share your deepest, darkest secrets, and you don't ask them for theirs. You're polite, and you're considerate, but you consider that, this is a stranger. You're in a grocery store checkout line. So that's one example of how you must consider context.
Love
Right.
it. Love it. Yeah. It brings back lots of memories. I am from New York, where things tend to be really fast, and I would go to school in New Mexico. When I'd go to the grocery store in New Mexico, I had to get used to things being much slower at the grocery checkout line. I was
Yeah.
okay, this is a little different here, but it's yeah. So context is key
Mhm.
to really the three-legged stool, if you will, of
Yeah.
balance that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Um, I, I think you mentioning that there's balance in the relationships and in this context, and
Mhm.
I also see balance like in terms of just some of the practices we do, right? Like
Mhm. For
a
sure.
healthy balance of testing and of development. If you get into the not the weeds of development software,
Mhm.
we see too many places where they don't have a good balance in place, and then they run into a lot of problems. Um, and have you seen that as well? Just where a lot of things are out of balance in
Yeah, yeah, it's really common. I mean, you see pressure to deliver, um, which is out of balance with the need to learn, or the need to get something out the door that's out of balance with the risk of sending something that isn't of decent quality, right? Of
right,
good enough quality for that context. So those are all about um, context, but that also plays into potentially the professional interests and focus of the people involved.
mm,
So if you are in taking the testing and development situation, if you have a team where most of the people come from a development background and they maybe don't view testing as super valuable, and you have maybe one person who has a testing background, that's out of balance, right?
mhm,
Those professional um, considerations are likely to be out of balance there.
right, right. Yeah, that's and it's largely I guess one of my frustrations in this software field is just so much is invisible. Like
Mhm.
physical balance, you can see are you in balance or not physically. Um, that's easier to see, but when you get into the intellectual, stuff, it's not so easy to know that you're out of balance.
Yes and no. Um, so I actually think about this congruence thing as the metaphor I use is a wobble board,
Hmm.
right? So if you're not in balance, it is going to be immediately evident, like you say, in the physical sense. But there are other things you can notice about yourself that are a clue that you're out of balance.
Right.
Like the little article that you came across that prompted you to invite me on here. I talked about someone who was a consultant and who uh, he was supposed to be helping this company improve something. He went and started yelling at the people because he didn't think their skills were good enough. You're lucky to even have a job. So he was, had he been paying attention, his level of judgment might have been a clue to him that he was out of balance.
Right.
So
Right.
that's almost always a clue that something is out of balance. If you're feeling judgmental, if you find yourself, you know, blaming people or pointing your finger at people in blame, that's almost always a clue that you're out of balance. Um, if you are, uh, feeling tense or tight, or you're starting to feel a bit of nausea, that's a clue that
Mhm,
something's out of balance,
mhm,
right?
mhm.
Right.
Yeah,
That maybe, go ahead.
our bodies are helping to help
Yeah.
us know how
Yeah.
if we're literally in balance
Yeah.
in the non-physical way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all of those sensations and our emotions are actually useful information about what's going on in the world around us. So we should pay attention to them.
Now, I got very interested in balance while writing the book Joy of Agility. It was really not a first class word for me in terms of thinking about it constantly and using it constantly prior to writing the book. And the reason it became important was this coach John Wooden that I always talk about, from UCLA, who passed a few years ago, but he basically learned that for his players to be champions, they needed to have physical, emotional, and mental balance.
Sure.
And like that was really profound to read that in that perspective. And the physical side was important, right? He would basically say, I don't care if you score a basket. If you're off balance when you scored the basket, you're not playing the John Wooden way. We play in balance. But then, it was deeply looking at emotional and mental side of things too. If you're upset about something and you're on the basketball field, court, you're not going to be playing at your top level. And
Right.
so the connection of speed to balance was something that I had never really put together before. And that helped me.
Well, also the connection of balance and grace.
Yes.
Right? It's hard to be graceful if you're out of balance.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I was mentioning this before we started the call, is that there's 6 mantras in Joy of Agility, and this was probably the hardest one to name because I was trying to, if we look at the definition in Merriam-Webster of Agile, it's, there's 2 definitions, but one of them is having an ability to be quick, resourceful, and adaptable. Wonderful. Everyone probably agrees with that. But the other definition is, being able to move with quick, easy grace. And you can substitute move with work with quick, easy grace and other words, right? Quick, easy grace, right? So there's that word grace. And the word grace is used in a way that means highly adaptable, easily adaptable, gracefully adapting to situations, which comes back to balance. And that's where I know, how do you make it a first class? How does balance, do you believe balance is really important in our industry?
Well, I think it's important in every aspect of life. I mean, that it's the only place from which we can access empathy, and it's the only place from which we can access our best thinking. So I think it's super interesting to like expand it beyond, I think about a other context, but, within that balance, testing versus development, risk versus schedule, learning versus delivering. I mean, there are so many things that we need to keep in balance. And I think they're often viewed as polarities. Those sorts of external things, they're often viewed as polarities, which tends to put a system into oscillation, which is out of balance, right? An oscillating system is not stable, it's unbalanced. So I think it's super important to think about those things in terms of, what's the upside of this that we want? How can we manage the downside? How can we balance? Because that's the only way we're going to be able to move fast and with grace.
Right.
Yeah.
Like there don't seem to be tools for this. We have Jira.
This is our tool. This is our tool for this. And this is our tool for this.
Right. So it really, must come from the mental and emotional side, perhaps.
Well, an awareness, certainly. Right. So a fool with a tool is still a fool. And I think we do tend to over rely on tools to replace thinking.
We do.
And to replace sensing. Right.
Yes. Like I guess I would just let me voice this frustration. I don't believe that balance is given enough weight, if you will. I don't believe it's congruence. You could call it congruence, as you do. And I think I worry, is this because people don't understand the value of balance in terms of, the benefits in the world, the benefits in life, your own personal life, or your benefits in business? Why is it not appreciated enough?
Well, Um, this is a big question.
Yeah,
And I pause because I think it goes back to some of the kind of foundational elements of, the way business happens in the US and in other parts of the world, where the primary focus is on extraction of labor and maximizing profit.
right.
Right. And so if that's your major focus, that pushes out all sorts of other things that might actually help you be more successful in terms of sustainability and long-term value.
Right.
So I
Right.
think it's deeply systemic,
Hmm.
right? And baked into the heritage, with all our family tree of management that we are all living with the echoes of.
So it's deeply systemic, and
Mhm.
it's not so easily solved. But in the smaller scale, it may be a little bit like, so we went back to testing and development, having some
Yeah.
good balance there. I mean, it can be applied in the small, maybe a little bit easier than in the large.
Well, I think if you can start to apply it in the small, which I have seen done many, many times, where you can actually get a team working well and being in balance and being graceful. Um, that, if nothing else, lets people know it's possible to work a different way.
Right.
And they will take that awareness with them wherever they go.
Yes.
So, you know, systems are change slowly until they change quickly. And I don't know that in my lifetime it's going to change, but I know that there are certainly people who are thinking about how can we do things in a more balanced, sustainable, and graceful way.
Right.
And even if we only change it for one team, even if we only change it for two people when we go in and work someplace, or one person, for that person, they're going to be a better developer, a better tester, a better manager. They're going to be a better brother, sister, sibling,
Yeah.
child, parent, aunt, uncle, spouse, neighbor. And so
Hmm.
those little things ripple out. So I think it's easy for people to think, oh, well, we can't change the whole big system. Why bother? It's like, because it does make a difference to the individual humans.
Yeah.
Get them to a place of balance and grace and congruence where they're less stressed, then that sends out a ripple.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to take a question here. We have one from Dylan. Dylan Hatch. How might we limit the risk of the seesaw overbalancing that comes from vigorous debate when each participant feels that their goal is to get as much as possible of their point of view affirmed?
Mm. Well, I think anytime you have kind of two people or two camps who are kind of going at it, each trying to get the best for them, it's inherently conflictual, and it can get very locked into a sort of balance that is not necessarily helpful. It's more like it gets into a stuckness rather than balance. And I think the way I usually approach that is I look for a third way, or a fourth way, or a fifth way, where things might it might be possible to meet substantial needs of both,
Both
or you
parties.
look for where those needs overlap and
Yep.
try to build from there.
Right. Very good. Yeah. I mean, options are always a way sort of sometimes out of being stuck.
Mhm.
Like, what
Yeah,
are our options?
yeah,
Love considering options, and it gives a certain sense of freedom that we're not stuck. There are options available to us,
yeah,
and part of being graceful is being able to handle difficult obstacles and difficult situations.
yeah.
adapting to those situations. Um, so coming back to some of the books you've written, obviously your latest book. Well, your latest book is the new version of Agile Retrospectives.
Yes.
That's another one. Do you find, oh, there's the book, right? So this is the second edition of Agile
Yes.
Retrospectives.
Yeah.
And it's just out recently.
Yeah, it's like
Um,
came out in March.
and I think you mentioned that you thought it was going to have a light retouch, but it ended up with a complete rewrite or something.
Yeah, we added 120 pages of new and expanded content.
Yeah.
So yeah, it wasn't just a little refresh.
So speaking of balance and retrospectives, can you talk about that? To the extent, do like really retrospecting, is that, and building that into the work you do, is it
Well,
neglected?
I think for a lot of places, there is a big imbalance there because teams are expected to do retrospectives, but then they are expected to maximize delivery. So there's no learning time, which is one of those imbalances we talked about earlier. It's like, yeah, you have to balance what is the learning time, what is the time to, think about and devise new ways to do things and then learn how to do them and practice them. So that's very often out of balance.
Right.
I think sometimes there's an imbalance in focusing on we have to do something versus we have to experiment with something or we have to learn something in order to know how to experiment or learn.
Yeah.
So
And
I think,
yeah.
no, go ahead.
Well, you mentioned that before. In some sense, the learning versus doing is related to the retrospectives, right?
Sure.
Retrospectives are intended to help us learn,
Yeah.
like what
Yeah.
could be better. I guess what I don't see, like in our company, we have one today. It's a monthly we call it an all heads meeting.
Hmm.
And during that all heads meeting, we are going to look at a pie chart. And the pie chart is going to show our different customers and how much of our business is going to different customers. So it's a pie chart, and
Sure.
we can see very quickly, is it balanced or imbalanced? And there have been years where it was very unbalanced.
Mm-hmm.
You saw too big of a pie piece that was with one customer, and we go, oh, this is too dangerous. We don't want to rely too
Mm-hmm.
much on that one customer.
Mm-hmm.
We're not doing that for learning versus doing. No one's coming to meetings and going, here's the pie chart. We're doing tiny little sliver of learning, and the rest is doing. And clearly that's a problem.
Yeah.
We're out of balance. I don't see the visual management of balance happening in the working world.
Hmm. Well, I think in some ways it goes back to one of those assumptions that we kind of take on when we walk into a system. And you just named it when you said you have an all heads meeting. They're in many places called all hands meetings, which I see a tie back to that separation of heads and hands, which is very common. It's a hangover from the industrial age where there was the people who thought about stuff and the people who, did stuff, the brains and the brawn.
Right.
Yeah. So how would one devise visual management to think about that?
Partly it's time tracking in some sense that as I'm coming to work, what am I doing? Am I working right? Am I doing stuff right now, or am I learning stuff right now? So if we even had a way just to track that, we could have a pie chart for it. And we could look at it and go, maybe we need to learn a little bit more.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find ways to make this
Yeah.
more practical.
Well, and the other thing to think about is what are we learning? I mean, I think in a lot of organizations, there's a focus on learning skills that are directly applicable to the job you are doing right now. So, if you're a developer, you can learn a new language or you can learn a new library or a new framework. But that's not necessarily going to give you a whole lot of leverage, right? Because there's learning near neighbor skills, or even learning something that's outside of your focus, your professional focus, can be hugely valuable.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, I read a lot of history, which is not directly related to the work I do, you'd think, but it's super helpful in understanding that that there's always something that went before. Particularly as consultants, we go in and we look at organizations and we see what's there, but what is there is the result of stuff that happened before, and that still echoes, right? So it's useful to build the habits of mind that come from studying history. Just for an example, there's tons of other examples of things that come from an unrelated field that are very, very useful.
Yeah.
I actually think, like, when I started programming, there were probably only a handful of schools that offered computer science degrees in the country. So it was a while ago. So everybody, or almost everybody, came from something else, right?
Yeah.
And so we had a lot of different perspectives, which was more balanced.
Right.
Right. It wasn't just, everybody has a computer science background, which I'm not denigrating the value of that at all. It's hugely valuable. But if that's the only kind of background thinking people have, you're missing an element of balance.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I often, ask people like developers, I'm like, have you read Lean Startup? Because it's written from like an entrepreneurial point of view. It's written from the
Mhm.
point of view of thinking about how you're spending your money. Capital efficient experimentation is a term used in the book. Do developers think about that? A capital efficient experimentation? A lot of people, they don't use that language in development. So it's like,
Mm.
by reading other books and by getting into other fields, you can really gain much more maturity and balance.
Yeah.
Basketball. I don't even play basketball. I occasionally watch it when the Golden State Warriors are doing well. But this basketball coach, John Wooden, with all of this incredible wisdom about
Mhm.
how to make championship teams, it totally applies to the industry I'm in
Yeah.
and other parts of life. So I couldn't agree more. It's that I'm sure the history, we learned so much from it. Do you know David Schmaltz? Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, so he would
Yeah.
he would say this phrase that, where have the buffaloes of change been roaming in the organization, right? Uh,
Yep. Because those hoof prints are there, and 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 they'll tell you a lot about how people are going to respond to whatever current change there is. Yeah.
right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's the fiscal pressure. Like a lot of times, what we find is that the finances of the company really have a major impact on.
Mhm.
Um, well, maybe it's the invisible context. Like we talked about congruence.
Yeah.
A lot of times, people aren't even aware of the deep financial things
Yeah.
going on.
Yeah. I mean, I sometimes talk about how knowledge is bifurcated in organizations, in that the people at the top of the organization tend to know the contextual information. This is our market. These are our customers. This is our value proposition. This is how we make money. This is where we're positioned in the market. All of that contextual information. But they don't know much about what it actually takes to deliver software. I mean, that's a generalization. Obviously, there are some people who do, and then the people who are actually doing the work at the bottom of the organization understand how day-to-day work gets done, but they don't know the contextual information about how we make money, who are our customers, all of that kind of stuff, which leaves them both out of balance and makes them both look foolish and stupid to each other.
Right, right.
So then that puts relationships out of balance. Yeah.
Fascinating. Yeah.
So
So a knowledge, there's an imbalance in knowledge, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not like everybody needs to know everything. I mean, you don't necessarily need to know how to do a financial analysis, but it's useful to know how your company makes money. And you don't need to know how to write code if you're in a senior leadership position, but it's useful to know like what it takes to get the work done.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Fascinating. I know one of my favorite books of yours is The Seven Rules for
Mm.
Change. That's the shortened name, right? What's the book?
So I wrote 7 rules, is sort of in response to what I had been observing about how people go about change in most organizations. And even when we're looking at changing to an agile method, it's often done in a not very agile way. Instead of big planning up front, roll it all out. That's not learned from it. So that book is written as a set of heuristics that approach change from a very human centric way and a complexity informed way.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So years ago, I read this book called The Image by Kenneth Boulding. And he talks about how everybody has an internal model of how the way works. And if that model is directly challenged, they tend to defend. But if you can come at it obliquely, then you can start shifting things. So this was written, I think, in maybe the 70s, maybe the 60s. I don't remember for sure. But I'm reading another book on the science of storytelling, which talks about the neurology behind this image we have in our head. And the neurology has caught up, or the science has caught up with what Boulding's insight was all
Wow.
those years ago. Is
Wow.
that we have this model, and when it's challenged, we defend. So in some ways, 7 Rules for Change is all about how can you bring about change in a way that doesn't kick off people's defenses. So you have to start from congruence. You have to start from a position of being balanced yourself, considering your own needs, the needs of the other people you're working with, and the context. And then you have to honor where they have been. Because even if they're doing something that seems nonsensical to you, it probably was sensical to someone at some time.
Right.
And so you have to work with that.
So do you look at retrospectives as that chance to sort of honor where they've been and the context?
Well, for sure. I mean, part of a retrospective is getting a shared pool of data within a team about what has gone on. So that is balancing all of the perspectives in the room. It's balancing the need to deliver more effectively with the need to maintain collaborative relationships within the group.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And being aware of, seeing where have we come from, right? And
Right.
having some temporal sense. Yeah, for sure.
And just to switch back to the positive, the 7 rules, do you see balance in any of those rules?
Well,
Is that adding balance by?
The first rule is strive for congruence.
Okay.
So it really starts from that.
Yeah.
And the second rule is honor the past, present, and people, which says, things are the way they are because they got that way, not because people are stupid or bad or wrong. And what they're doing worked at some point, or was the best thing somebody could come up with at some point, or was imposed by somebody who thought it was going to be useful at some point. So, honor that and think about what is it about the existing system that you want to keep, not just what you want to change. I think that's a balance point that often gets missed. Is what do we want to preserve about this? What is useful? What is working? What is valuable that we want to preserve, even as we move towards a change?
Yeah.
So balance comes in there. Balance comes in the need to not prescribe what's going to happen necessarily, but to create some boundaries around, what we want more of, what we want less of, so you can balance autonomy with and creativity with the need to achieve a certain outcome. So it shows up in that way too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if I thought about it more, I'd probably be able to come up with several other examples.
Yeah.
That's nice.
I'm sure that's there. What sticks out for me is the story you told of that engineer who started to keep a visual board of the work.
Oh, sure.
Can you tell that story real quick?
So I think this is the one you're referring to. It's like there's a guy I knew who wanted to have his team start doing Kanban. Is that the story you're referring
Yes,
to?
that's
Yeah.
the one.
So he tried to talk some people into it, and they just, no, we're not interested. So he started his own little personal Kanban board for his own work. And someone noticed it. This was in the before times when people were present, right? And they could walk by his cube and see that. And someone got curious and asked him about it. So he explained what he was doing and told him how it helped him. And then that guy said, oh, I'm going to try that. And he tried it and he found it useful. And then someone else noticed and tried it and found it was useful. And at that point, it was easy for the team to take it up, right? It was no longer trying to convince anybody or argue with anybody. It was a demonstration of something useful, and it was working by attraction, right? I think is a super useful principle for change. Work by attraction.
Mm-hmm.
Pull people towards it, generate interest.
Yes, you call it change by attraction, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's a wonderful story of being graceful. I mean, that I couldn't think of a more graceful way to, ultimately influence a whole team.
Yeah.
It's truly graceful. It may be slower than you'd like, you'd like them to change overnight, but that's not recognizing, certain levels of resistance or ignorance,
yeah. Well, I think people count the time spent on change in an odd way. I mean, so they think, the change is from the time we get the idea to the time we dictate it, and it looks like people are complying. But there's another part of time that comes after here, which is the people being unhappy about it, the people not being willing to solve the little problems that always come up, the people feeling pressured and put upon, and therefore not being in an emotionally balanced state to do good work, right? So the total time is this. People think it's here, but it's actually this. So the total time between the time this guy spent doing his own little experiment and getting somebody else interested, it was probably about the same.
Yeah.
With a lot less ill feeling.
And if there's a lot of ill feeling, then it's not even a timeline. It kind of drops off.
Right. And then you are not emotionally balanced. If you are feeling like I've been forced into something, I've been browbeaten into it, fine, I'll just do it your way. You're not in an emotionally balanced or congruent state, right? And so you can't access your best creativity.
Right. Yeah, love it. Yeah, so I mean, I guess I would be, in some ways, I think your book, this 7 Rules for Positive Productive Change, is largely about being balanced and graceful.
Yeah. I think you're right.
It's just a lot deeper dive into what do you actually need to do.
Mm-hmm.
My book, Joy of Agility, references a lot of books. Esther's referenced several times in the book, and it's because my book doesn't have all the answers. You've got to point to
Neither does mine.
Well, yeah. But as far as I'm concerned, the be balanced and graceful mantra is very well, supported by your book on 7 rules for productive change, positive productive change. It's just you gotta translate the words a little bit to what we're talking about. Congruence for me, this session will forever, connect congruence to balance. So I think that's thank you for that.
Well, it's been really helpful for me to think more about how balance and grace shows up in the 7 rules. That's really super interesting. I'm going to be I'm going to be playing with that idea for a while.
Yeah, cool. Well, we have
Yeah.
about 5 minutes left. I really just, first of all, I want to thank everyone for
Yeah.
coming today. I see. I'll go backwards. Frederick, um, Dylan, and Carol, and Amelia, Tim, Brett, Christopher, and everyone else that I might have. Amitai, Michelle.
Mm,
Um, it's great to have you here. Namat
yes.
from Arlington.
Lots of names I recognize. So hi, old friends.
Right.
Hi, new friends.
Yeah, so I think, one thing I've been saying a lot lately is that in terms of agility and agile, I think we're still in the early days. And people
Mm,
always look at me funny, like, what are you talking about? I do believe we're still in the early days. We have to keep approaching this with beginner's mind, keep realizing we have a long way to go. We do not visualize balance very well.
No.
I don't believe we do visual management with balance. And I don't think we really I don't think balance and grace are first class things that we come to work every day thinking about. But I think, if we
Once
want
we've
better
been.
outcomes, we might be looking at those
Yeah.
things a little more deeply.
That's so interesting, Josh, because on one hand, there are no more early adopters of Agile, right? We're 20 plus years in. Um, and on the other hand, we are very early, as you say, in our understanding of how we can actually achieve that, right? Because it's not just rote following of a process,
Right. Right.
right?
It's far more than that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think we need to really be creative and realize, what needs to happen in order to make this go deeper and be really meaningful.
yeah.
I know. So Brett Schuhart's here, and
Hmm.
he's been studying flexibility and teaching classes on that, on physical flexibility, and how could the concept of a gym apply to our world? People that keep fit and work out, or take care of their physical bodies, are at it every day doing things.
Hmm.
We don't have concepts. We don't really, that I'm aware of, have a sort of daily practice of keeping fit in terms of
Yeah,
mental and emotional
that's
balance.
interesting. So
Um,
I did Pilates this morning, which is a lot about balance and a lot about being able to move with grace. And
mhm.
yeah, how can we translate that into our professional sphere?
Yeah, we
Interesting.
got to take the blinders off and realize that, and be
Mhm.
humble enough to go, we're not in balance.
Yeah,
We're not in balance in
yeah,
this area or that area. Tim Ottinger was mentioning here about, you know, let me just put this up here, the number of failures we have, and how are we open to that, right? Like, um, should there be some knowledge will turn out to not be useful, some experience might fail. Should there be a balance of successful and unsuccessful work?
well, I think we have to accept that there will be some unsuccessful work, right?
If
I think it's a myth that it should be successful all the time. If everything is successful all the time, you're not trying anything new. You're not learning anything.
Exactly.
But I think that is the sort of the unspoken expectation.
Right, right. I mean, I know Jeff Bezos said, if you're not failing fairly
Mhm.
frequently, you're not pushing hard enough. Exactly, it's
Yeah.
exactly what you just said. And Bezos has been famous in saying he's proud of the failures, because they learned so much from him.
Yeah. I mean, there's different kinds of failure. There's a failure that comes from complexity. It's just a confluence of events. There's failure that comes from an informed experiment that doesn't work out. And there's the failure that comes, I'm editing myself right now because, there's a known way to do something well and somebody didn't do it that way. So um, failures of lack of thought or lack of attention. And
Right.
those are the ones you want to not have. But the failures that come from a well thought out experiment,
Bring them on.
that's, yeah, yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I think as we conclude here, I think, it's important to take, first of all, we're going to fail at congruence sometimes. We're going
Oh,
to
yes.
fail at
Oh, yes.
I certainly am not always balanced, and I think it would be ridiculous to say we always are. We're always trying to get in balance, but
Right.
we're often out of balance. We're often ungraceful. doesn't mean that you're not committed to this path. It's just you got to get back on the track. And hopefully this session together helped to maybe inspire you to focus on those two words, balance and grace. So I highly recommend you read some of Esther's books. They're really wonderful, and
Thank you.
let's keep the conversation going online. And thanks everyone for showing up today. We'll be back on next week with another edition on another mantra. We're going to publish the upcoming sessions that are expected the rest of the summer. So thanks again, Esther. Appreciate it.
I deeply appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation with you, Josh.
My pleasure. It's wonderful.